to episode 229 of the Various Sundry Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Harmon, joined live from the Vault Studio, on the beautiful campus of Grace College and Theological Seminary, by my good friend, my colleague, my co-host, and the man who is now fully in summer mode, John Scott Sloat.
What tells you I'm in summer mode? Is it the polo?
It's the polo.
Okay. I almost went no dress shoes this morning, and I put on some professional looking sneakers, and it just looks so weird, and I couldn't do it, and so I put on the dress shoes.
But your boss is a sneaker guy.
He is.
Does he? I guess I haven't really noticed. Does he ever wear them to the office?
Yeah. He had Jordans on this morning.
Okay. Yeah. He's big into sneakers.
He is. He's big into shoes, so he has 3 or 4 pairs of brown dress shoes.
Okay.
I got one.
Yeah. I just don't get that.
So
it's not my thing. That's not a criticism. It's just not my thing.
No. For the most part, I want my shoes to be comfortable.
Yes.
Comfortable, and I want them to look normal.
Yes.
I do not want them to draw attention to themselves.
There you go. All right, so
this will be a good litmus test to see if he listens to the pod.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, all right. So we're in the studio on a Friday morning, which is very unusual, and that's because I will be out of town next week. When this episode drops, I will be in Ethiopia.
Nice. When's the plane take off?
Saturday.
So tomorrow.
Yeah. So
when this drops, you will be in Ethiopia.
Yeah, when this drops, I'll have completed my first day of teaching on that Tuesday.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what are you covering while you're over there?
Pauline theology for pastors.
Okay. So are we taking the position Paul wrote his epistles?
Yes, I'm going out on a huge limb and gonna claim that Paul wrote all 13 of them.
Wow.
I know.
You're such a maverick.
I am. I am going out on a major limb there. So yes. And then right after we finish recording this episode, we're going to record another episode.
The following week.
Because the following week, you will be out of town.
I'm on vacation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we've recorded when I'm on vacation before. It's not a huge obstacle.
Yeah, I don't want to do that to you, though, if we can avoid it.
It's nice to have the buffer.
Yeah.
To sort of say, oh, yeah, that went out. That's right.
Yes.
So are you packed?
I've started.
Okay. What do you pack for Ethiopia, other than just sort of generic clothes? Are you teaching in khakis, jeans, shorts?
Definitely not shorts.
Okay. Air conditioning in the facility?
This I do not know.
Okay. Well, I look forward to a full report. How many people are coming? Any idea?
I think I've got 10 students in the class. So
nice.
A small group, which
That'll
is
be
good.
Fun.
Yeah.
I assume a prerequisite is English speaking.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It'll be all English based. Their English is good enough to sit in English lectures and learn.
Nice. And so, so you're doing Pauline theology, basing it off Doug Moo's book. What sort of framework do you have?
Well, here's part of the trick. So they have a very difficult time getting resources there, shipping books and things like that. And plus, Ethiopia is not the wealthiest country in the world.
Sure.
So many of the students have limited means. So so combine that, and basically they really can't get books easily. Meaning, so I couldn't choose here's Doug Moo's Pauline theology book. Just read sections of this.
Yeah.
So I had to create a reader that is basically selections from different books, keeping within the copyright laws, of course. Which is
that was one of my questions.
10% of a work. You can copy up to 10% of a work without getting permission. Yeah.
Interesting.
Which, is fine with Doug Moo's 780-page Pauline theology. There's a lot I can, that gives me 78 pages there. But, that doesn't get me to the 300 pages of approximate reading they want. So I probably pulled from a dozen, maybe 15 different sources to cobble together a reader. They're going to get a heavy dose of stuff from me since that's easy to copy.
Yeah, you can't. Can you violate your
I
own?
sure can, yeah.
Okay,
Because
wow.
it's the publisher. It's not me.
Yeah, so you don't even own the copyright on your own work.
Not really.
Okay. Wow.
Like I can't just do what I want with it.
Snap. So okay. Anyway, let's move on because I could ask more questions, and maybe we'll in the next episode we'll do a little bit deeper dive into what you're going to be teaching over there.
There you go. If you'd like to contact the show, you can reach us on Twitter at VNSPod.
Or would like Matt's reader.
There you go. You can email the show, variousandsunderpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook and on YouTube, and we would love for you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, John, since we're recording in advance, we'll do a very brief sports segment here. The biggest sports story, which actually just broke like early this morning,
and probably more will come out over
I would
over the
assume
weekend.
so.
Yeah,
But the world number one golfer, Scotty Scheffler, was arrested outside of the PGA Championship. Basically, I think details are still emerging, but essentially there was a major accident of some kind, and traffic was being directed past the accident, and there was some sort of mix-up of him not following the traffic instructions properly, I guess, to try to get into the golf club to be to get ready for his round this morning, and it led to him being arrested.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah,
I just saw the headline that he was arrested at the PGA.
yeah, it's all a big like.
The way you just described it makes it sound like a nothing burger.
Is a huge nothing burger. It's a total overreaction by a cop, I think, here in this scenario.
Power tripping.
Yeah, but what's fascinating is there was actually an ESPN reporter who saw the whole thing and recorded chunks of it. So, there's not going to be, some of these things end up being kind of a he said kind of thing, but I'm pretty sure there's actual video footage of the incident and what's going on there. So I think this is all but they delayed the start of the round this morning
because he can't play.
Because he can't. Well, yeah, he's in custody, and I'm sure the PGA is freaking out, trying to get him.
Their number one golfer.
Yeah. So
and the subject of Netflix documentaries, right? He's on that.
Is he?
Yeah, my understanding is there's a Netflix documentary, and he's. Or at least the first season, he was one of the guys they followed.
Oh, interesting. So, anyway, I'm sure more will come out, and by the time we get back in the studio, we'll have forgotten this ever happened.
Being locked up for his Christian faith.
That's right. He's being persecuted
for trying to live out his vocation. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah. Speaking of which, probably the other big sports story is the Harrison Butker graduation address.
Yes.
Did you hear about this?
I saw the clip before I realized he was a athlete.
Yeah.
Football players, you don't really know their faces,
right?
And so I didn't recognize him,
especially kickers.
Especially kickers, which it sounds like, yeah, you're a conservative Catholic dude
speaking at a conservative Catholic institution.
Mm-hmm. And people are losing their minds.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I saw several people commenting, NFL freaks out over this. Meanwhile, mentioning player beating his wife, nothing. Player being arrested for drug possession, nothing. The sort of things that raise to the level of the NFL coming out and making a official statement, condemning or whatever these actions. Oh, I see. So conservative Catholic says conservative Catholic things at conservative Catholic school, and that warrants a condemnation from the NFL. Got it.
The headline coming out of this, Matt Harmon defends Catholicism.
Yes, there you go. There you go. Just more people being persecuted for their faith, John.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on now to our first segment of discussing our summer read. So we are discussing Patrick Schreiner's book, The Transfiguration of Christ, an exegetical and theological reading. We're going to cover the intro and the first couple of chapters, so we're going to have to be very selective in what we try to cover here in this. But I think one of the things that he helpfully notes in the introduction is the fact that in some ways, the Transfiguration is surprisingly neglected in theological reflection.
That is an interesting point he brings up. And he brings it up, and it's even covered in like who he quotes throughout this book. Like there's a few modern scholarship pieces throughout. There's a lot of church fathers in here.
Yes.
And he seemingly goes out of his way to quote the church fathers again and again and again.
Oh, it's absolutely an emphasis. Absolutely. There's a very intentional interest in bringing in the insights of the early church fathers on the Transfiguration. So,
I love his writing style, by the way. Just a comment on Patrick.
He's a very clear writer.
And just when he starts with first, second, third, even those lists throughout a writing can be rare in academic writing sometimes.
Yes.
And he does a good job. I also enjoy some of the quirks of his writing. For instance, on page 2, he talks about the Transfiguration being taken out of scholarship and Bibles. He says they're Thomas Jeffersoned, which I appreciate.
Yes,
our third U.S. president being turned into a verb.
Yes,
for his famous Bible that
produced
any miracles.
I think in a previous book, I don't think in here he's done this, but he has dropped references to Taylor Swift as well.
Yeah, I'm here for it.
So I appreciate also very early on here, page 4, my basic assertion in this book is this: the Transfiguration reveals Jesus' double sonship. In the Transfiguration, both the future glory of the earthly and suffering Messianic Son and the pre-existent glory of the heavenly and eternally begotten Son are revealed. So I love the fact he lays it out very clearly. This is what I'm going to argue. And he's absolutely correct that most modern scholarship on the Transfiguration goes one of those directions,
absolutely,
but doesn't talk about both of them. And honestly, the vast majority go with the earthly and suffering angle and don't talk as much about his divine identity being revealed in this event.
Yeah.
So, I think it very, very clearly kind of lays that out. So I appreciate that. I mean, that's really kind of the thrust of the introduction here. I mean, there's so many things that we could say. Anything else you want to highlight from the introduction before we get to the first couple chapters here?
I don't think so. I'm just looking at all my highlights in the introduction. I think we've covered most of them. As we transition to chapter 1, his initial comment at the beginning of chapter 1 just tells me that he's going to be a good interview and you and I are going to enjoy him. Do you see the first sentence there?
Yes.
The best TV comedy series of all time is Seinfeld.
And then continue.
If you disagree with me, I'm sorry that you're wrong.
Yeah. Indeed. Yes. So he lays out in this first chapter 5 reasons that the Transfiguration is neglected. Number 1, we think it plays a minor role in the Scriptures and the creeds.
Yeah.
It is interesting it doesn't show up as much in the creeds, for sure. Number 2, we are inattentive to the goal of salvation. And this is where he really starts to introduce one of the areas where I think some evangelicals are going to get a little uneasy. His reference to the beatific vision.
Is that how that's pronounced?
I just never know how to pronounce that.
Beatific.
Sure, that's how we're going to go with that. The idea of that the ultimate goal of salvation is becoming like God by beholding Him. Mm-hmm. Now that's fine.
That almost sounds like John Piper.
Yeah, Piper and Edwards, really. Yeah. But there's going to be some points where he wanders. He flirts with some Greek Orthodox kind of ideas in here in terms of theosis.
And he says that in the introduction, or maybe the preface, that his first readers of this
Yeah.
reined him in on some of those things
Yeah.
and pulled him back.
Yep. Number 3, in terms of why we neglect the Transfiguration, we find it too mysterious, symbolic, and mystical.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. 4th, we are too earthly minded. Yes. No, I don't know. I feel like this hits a segment of people, but it's not as broad.
Yeah.
And then here we go. Number 5, we are suspicious of deification. He basically says it's because the Eastern tradition has associated this event with what they call deification or theosis. This is a central idea of Eastern Orthodox theology and is viewed as problematic by some Western theologians.
And in the footnote there, he goes on to say, some of the reformers held to this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, he goes on, deification is difficult to define, but we can describe it simply as the glorification of a person into the likeness of a deity. To put it in another way, theosis is the transformation of the soul into union with deity. And so the Transfiguration then is a preview from this perspective of what will happen to us as believers.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what do you think of that? Like that's, I suppose, sort of the I think of what is it, 2 Corinthians 3, when we behold the beauty of God, we're transformed from one degree of glory to the other.
Yep.
What we behold, we become like. You know,
Yep.
I think I'm on board with those things.
Yep.
However, the deification almost sounds like a step too far.
Right. And from what I understand, it feels like at least some ways that theosis is presented is that it blurs the distinction between humanity and deity. That basically there's a creation of almost a hybrid kind of like part God, part human in our ultimate. That there's a mixture of essence almost kind of thing.
Like a demigod almost.
Yeah, or at least that's how some have, I think, understood that or pushed in that direction. So I don't know. Maybe we can ask Patrick about that. So anyway, he then goes on to share 5 reasons not to neglect the Transfiguration. I won't read them all, but I did think the fact that it combines biblical and systematic theology, I think, is a helpful observation that both of those lenses are valuable. Anything else I wanted to highlight of that? Let's see. That's probably the big one that. And what else from chapter 1 in that it maybe stood out to you here?
I'm trying to remember where he spoke about John's gospel. Yes, and maybe just to get your thoughts, because in the second paragraph on page 19, a couple sentences in, additionally, it's not strictly true that John doesn't include the Transfiguration. He simply doesn't recount the narrative. The light of the Transfiguration permeates John's gospel. It beams streams into every narrative, as Lewisy, I don't know how to pronounce that, affirms John's gospel affords a perpetual theophany, a permanent sighting of the appearance of God's glory in Christ, temporarily glimpsed at Transfiguration. I don't know that I totally see that as I'm reading through John's gospel.
Yeah, I would keep those things distinct.
Okay.
I mean, I think they are broadly related in terms of revealing Jesus' glory.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that I just don't see – I mean, the Transfiguration seems like so much of a specific one-off event in the Synoptics. it's it's the revealing, it's the pulling back of the veil of his flesh, so to speak, and giving you direct access in one sense to his divine nature. I just don't see that framed that way in the Gospel of John. Mm-hmm. Even though conceptually the idea of revealing Jesus' glory is the same, I would not put it that way. All right, I know we're just skimming through this, but chapter 2, we are looking at the glorious setting. So basically, he does a lot to try to unpack some of the details of just the surroundings, the mountain, the timing, the people that are there, all that sort of stuff. But I think for our readers what would be most interesting was probably on page 28 where he lays out what he calls his hermeneutical grammar. And this is going to be also another area where I think some readers are gonna chafe or just be like, I don't know, because he embraces what he calls what's been referred to as the quadriga, the fourfold sense of Scripture, right? So, which is rooted in church history. So this is not like some recent little creation, but basically, he says it wasn't solidified until the Middle Ages, but the basic moves seem evident in the Scriptures and in the early church. I'm less sure about in the Scriptures, depending on what you mean by that. But so basically, so he helpfully explains these. So first is the literal sense, then the spiritual sense, which he refers to as the typological.
You're not in love with that.
I'm not in love with that.
The listener cannot see your facial expressions like I can.
Then the tropological, which is the moral sense, and then the anagogical, which is the eschatological sense. So basically, the literal sense is the meaning the author intended to communicate to the original audience. The spiritual sense, or what he says we call the typological sense, it concerns what we should believe. And then the third sense is the tropological sense, what we call the moral sense. It tells us what to do. And then the fourth sense, anagogical, tells us the things to come.
What do you think of that? Because I think this is the way we present this in at least in hermeneutics classes that I took was they use the example of like the Good Samaritan, and sort of go through the literal sense, right? Looking at time, place, manner, when all this took place. The spiritual sense, they make a beeline for I believe Augustine on the Good Samaritan and just how out in left field he kind of was.
Yeah.
Super allegorical.
Yeah.
In that. And then the moral sense, obviously, and the eschatological sense. I'm not sure that there was much in.
Yeah.
But there wasn't much talk of that in the Good Samaritan. But what's your sense?
Well, I just get uncomfortable when it feels like you are forcing things upon the text rather than drawing things out. And I think that the fourfold sense can be guilty of forcing things onto a text rather than drawing them out. Or, and I think Patrick would probably push back on this. And I get that there can be – this is way too deep dive into hermeneutics here, but the distinction between meaning and significance, although it has some difficulties in framing it, I still think is largely helpful. To me, it seems to sometimes confuse those categories.
Yeah,
using the fourfold sense. That's a very short answer to a very long question.
So he uses this for for I believe this chapter and the next.
It informs the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like he's not always like explicit about now I'm moving to the anagogical sense or now I'm doing the tropological sense. It's kind of woven throughout.
What do you make of his use of it?
I appreciate that he seems to be restrained.
Yeah.
In his use. In other words, so there's no craziness where I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just out in left field. Like Augustine's interpretation of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Like that's just fanciful.
Yeah.
So I think it's restrained. But yeah, it's that will catch some readers
off guard.
I think. Yeah. Okay. So we need to wrap this up. Goodness gracious, it's going to be a 2-hour episode by itself. I will commend when he walks through the settings. He talks about the time frame, the location of it being on a mountain, and this he does a lot of good, careful work in the text.
Yeah.
And good
I really enjoyed this
biblical theology in here, and so I wouldn't want anything we just said about using the fourfold sense to turn somebody off. But he talks about the 3 witnesses, and I feel like he's very judicial in his use of these things. And one thing I love is that he does a great job of serving the reader well, because in his conclusion, not only does he give a good recap of what he's talked about, but he includes a helpful chart that encapsulates the key takeaways, and so he's someone that does a good job of serving his readers like that. Anything else that you feel like you have to mention in there before we move on to our main, quote unquote, main topic?
Yeah, our main, very quick topic. No, I thought this was good. I'm really enjoying this.
Good. I think our next episode, the following episodes, there'll be less content to cover, so we can maybe go in a little bit deeper at points. All right, John, now it is time to transition to our quote-unquote main topic, and it is part 1 of our series on the English Reformation. So, John, why are we talking about this? Besides the obvious, we always need content.
We need content. That's sort of an evergreen reasoning. Yeah. I gave a lecture on this in a Renaissance and Reformation course here on campus, and I was asked to come in and do something on the English Reformation, and really enjoyed it. Had a lot of fun interacting with students. The English Reformation is weird. I think we like to think of reformations as sort of being these, Martin Luther against the world sort of narratives, or John Huss against the world sort of narratives.
Yeah.
And the English Reformation just isn't that way.
Yeah.
But it's also the bloodiest as well. Like it's super bloody. There are a lot of executions that happen. So it's
bloodier than what was done to the Anabaptists?
Well, I'm not willing to go there.
Okay.
But as I think through the main, Luther died of old age. Calvin did too. Zwingli was killed in battle. But, the English Reformation, though, is just like, man, whoever is king kills whoever he doesn't like. and so it gets
or queen, you mean.
Or queen, yes. Whoever has the crown. There we go.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of why, and I think the English Reformation is just a little quirky, and I want to get into some of the reasons why it's a little quirky.
Okay.
So I think today we're hoping to set the stage a little bit for the English Reformation.
Sure.
And so to think about broader Europe to begin with in this way is Europe is just in a weird spot. So there's a lot of things going on. Late 1400s, early 1500s throughout Europe. So if you can think, you have the fall of Constantinople in the 1490s, and so the Ottomans take over that, and sort of throughout Europe, there's this feeling of impending doom that captures Europe. However, caveat, for England, that's not really a thing. or it's not as much of a thing. Like there's certainly fears of the Ottomans. There's fears of the Muslim armies coming up. But it's not the same because England's an island nation, right? They do their own thing. They're, the way Zwingli goes down, right? He's in Switzerland, has his Reformation, has sort of the state behind him as well, which is pretty interesting. However, the Pope says march on Zurich, and they, his Catholic armies march on Zurich and kill Zwingli.
Yeah.
Can't do that to England. You need a ship. You need some of these things. And so England's just a little weird. Another thing that makes this time period throughout Europe really interesting is we have what are known, and these are very, very broad categories, but the scholastics and the humanists. And so it's hard to say why humanism sort of came on the scene, but scholasticism's been around 400 or 500 years at this point, and is sort of this medieval way of thinking that's very much institutionalized and very much in the weeds. So these are the people that go like, could God make a knot so tight he couldn't untie it, or build this thing or whatever. Yeah. And the humanists sort of come out and question all these things, and they really love the humanities. They really want to see things read in their original languages. So they don't want to read Aristotle in Latin. They want to read Aristotle in Greek. They don't want to read the Bible in Latin. They want to read the Bible in Greek. And so there's sort of this –
I'm on board with that.
Yes. Same. However, they're devoutly Catholic as well.
Yeah.
So Thomas More is a humanist in England, English fella, doing his English thing.
Okay.
However, very anti-Reformation.
Yeah.
Is a very committed Catholic, is very committed to Henry VIII remaining in the Catholic Church, and is eventually executed for it. So you have these humanists, and I don't think, and let me know what you think of this, I don't think we get the Reformation without these humanists.
No, absolutely not. In part because I would say there are two things flow out of that. One is their insistence upon going back to the original text in terms of the original languages helped expose some of the unhelpful layers of Catholic doctrine that had been embedded in translation that could not actually be supported by the Greek text.
Yeah.
So that's huge. And the humanists were also big on helping to encourage the use of the printing press to disseminate their ideas.
Yes.
So without those two things, you probably don't – you definitely do not have the Reformation that happened. At best, you might have isolated pockets of malcontents expressing frustration, but nothing like this massive movement that happens.
Well, and you know who you get if you don't have the printing press and the humanists. You get John Wycliffe and John Huss.
Yeah.
These sort of like fringe thinkers that the Catholic Church eventually just kills. Well, not Wycliffe, but dig up his bones, burn it, and scatter it in a field or a lake or whatever.
Yeah.
So, the printing press is huge. I mean, that's the way the English Bible gets moved in, is by the printing press, smuggled in, basically. And the other thing I'll say is there's a lot of papal authority that sort of created this infrastructure, I think out of necessity after the fall of the Roman Empire, to sort of keep society running at some level.
Yeah.
And now that society's up and running throughout Europe, entering the 1500s following the plague, they want to keep this intact.
Yes.
And so they are pushing things. Have you heard of the donation of Constantine before?
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Okay, so the donation of Constantine is a document that the Catholic Church would show to kings and bring to kings that basically has Constantine's seal on it that said, hey, when Constantine really united the empire, he donated all the lands of the Roman Empire to the church and gave the church governing authority over the Roman Empire. Okay. So you all belong to us, and you must answer us by edict of Constantine, in the 300s and 400s.
Yeah.
So papal fun fact, a humanist, an Italian humanist, discovered that to be untrue. Like actually this didn't pop up until like 700 or 800.
Gotcha.
So Constantine could not have done this. And Constantine did not have the authority to do this.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think the one thing that's challenging for contemporary listeners for us today to get our minds around the Reformation is the deeply interconnected relationship between church and state.
Mm-hmm.
That we as Americans are just so accustomed to, this stark separation of some kind between church and state, and they are deeply intertwined all throughout the Reformation, with the Anabaptists being a notable exception to that rule.
Yeah.
And so I think in general it becomes challenging at times to untangle motivations for actions in terms of leaders of nations.
Yes.
Between political and religious.
You don't say.
I know.
This is new information and totally.
But I think that's just weird to most Americans if they try to wrap their brains around that.
Well, in the Lutheran Church gets into this too. I mean, you and I took a trip to Helsinki. Mm-hmm. Do you remember this? And going up to the library of the University of Helsinki.
Yeah.
And we knew that the state religion was Lutheranism.
Yes.
And we walk up, and outside the library, I think it was the library, outside the library, there's a giant statue of Martin Luther.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, huh. Interesting.
Yeah, in Helsinki.
A giant statue of Matthew, and to my knowledge, he did not make it ever to Helsinki.
No.
So that's Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Europe is a little has all that going on.
Yeah.
And England's impacted by that, but is separated by it because of their sort of qualification of an island nation.
Yes. But you had all of these sort of things laying the groundwork.
Yes.
The influence of humanism.
Absolutely.
Even some of the initial Reformation thinkers' ideas, getting to England as people would smuggle pamphlets and things like that.
Well, that's not we haven't even mentioned Erasmus yet, who spent a good amount of time in England and produced Greek Bibles that were used for English translations.
There you go.
Were used by English reformers for English translations of the Bible.
Yeah.
So a couple of things to England specifically that sort of lay the groundwork for Reformation. We mentioned John Wycliffe. Wycliffe had a group of followers called the Lollards.
Great name.
Yeah. It comes from a Dutch word, mean to mumble. I believe the Dutch word is lallen, which, I struggle to pronounce things that are in English here. I don't think I have any business pronouncing Dutch words.
Probably not.
But basically, this worked off of Wycliffe. They would basically take copies of Wycliffe's Bibles and they would gather in fields, caves, places, and read English Bibles together.
And what time frame are we talking here?
We're talking 1400s.
Okay.
Up into the Reformation. However, they're not huge in the English Reformation. There's actually a good bit of debate whether how involved were they. They were pretty anti-intellectual. They weren't a part of universities. They weren't doing all these things. But other pockets of Europe did not have this. Right. The Germans did not have a pocket of people who were reading the Bible in German.
Right.
But the English have the Lollards. Another thing that makes them interesting is there's something that's known as the War of Roses, which actually comes from Shakespeare. Did you know Shakespeare named that war?
Yes.
The War of Roses. And there's the Lancastrian dynasty and the Yorkist dynasty.
Okay.
Am I getting too in the weeds?
Maybe. I don't know.
Okay. But basically, what King Henry VII and Richard III are in this sort of battle at, oh my goodness, what's the name of the field? Bosworth Field. And there's this famous moment in Shakespeare's play where Richard is thrown from his horse, is absolutely defeated. Mm-hmm. And Shakespeare has the great line where King Henry is Richard is asking for a horse so that he can escape, so that he can just live. He goes, "Take my kingdom, give me a horse." And he says, a horse, my kingdom for a horse."
Mm-hmm.
Great line in Richard III.
Yeah.
Anyway, King Henry VII does not allow that. It kills him on the battlefield, as one does. However, Henry VII's claim to the throne is incredibly weak. It's through his mother and not his father. And so he, while king, has an incredibly weak claim. And so this sets up the need for male heirs.
Okay.
He needs male heirs, and his sons will also need male heirs.
Yes.
And that really sets the stage for what we'll talk about. Well, you and I will talk in probably a half hour about this, but our listeners will hear in a week.
Yeah.
This sets us up for King Henry VIII desperately, desperately needing an heir.
Yeah. And he will go to some extensive lengths to get that.
He will. And we'll cover all 6 of them.
There you go. Yeah.
Yes. And one final thing on the War of Roses here. Throughout Henry VIII's reign, there's a Yorkist trying to take over. He's a Lancastrian. There's a Yorkist trying to maneuver himself to get the crown. So his crown is not always safe throughout his reign. But I will leave it there.
That works for me.
Yeah. Have we set the stage?
I think we've set the stage. Yeah.
And all these things. There's a tinderbox of things going on in Europe.
Oh yeah.
There's political intrigue in England, and we'll leave it there for this week.
There you go. All right. Time now for This Day in Sports History.
All right. This Day in Sports History, May 21st.
Gosh.
Isn't that wild?
Feels like summer's already over.
Yeah, it does. 1996, May 21st, 1996, Ken Griffey Jr. at the age of 26 is the 8th youngest to hit 200 home runs.
He had such a smooth swing.
I'm not sure there was a smoother swing.
I mean, he was – I feel like in some ways he kind of gets forgotten. He was great.
Yep. Injury when he went from Seattle to Cincinnati. Injury got him.
Yeah.
And he just was never the same.
But, I mean, when he first started, he was a 5-tool player who just could do it all, basically.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, you could go onto YouTube, I'm sure, and find his highlights of him, like robbing home runs in center field and just hitting moonshot home runs where it's just –
And he did it in the steroids era. And as far as we know –
clean, yeah.
Clean.
Yeah.
But we don't – you're right. We don't celebrate him enough.
Yeah, I think he just gets overshadowed because his career late was curtailed by injuries. And then, you had Barry Bonds was active and Sammy Sosa, and, like he was in the steroid era, but there was never any indication that he was using them.
Well, yeah, he'd recover from injury quicker if he was using it.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's the only guy. If I went junior, you knew who we were talking about.
As long as I knew we were talking about baseball, because in NASCAR it's Dale Earnhardt.
Oh, Dale Earnhardt Jr. Sure.
So, yeah.
2006, the year I graduated high school, the Swedish ice hockey team Tre Kroner. Excuse me.
Did you remember your Seinfeld reference there, where they're coming back from Elaine and Putty? You're coming back on the airplane and.
No.
There's a whole little bit about Kroners.
Takes gold in the World Championships, becoming the first nation to hold both world and Olympic titles separately in the same year.
There you go.
Man. 2016, on the same card, American boxer Jermell Charlo KO's John Jackson in the 8th to claim vacant WBC super welterweight title, and Jermell Charlo beats Austin Trout on points to retain IBF version. First twins to hold world championship in the same weight division.
Yeah, so
Jermell and Jermal.
Yeah. Note to parents, if you have twins, you need to make those names a little bit more distinct.
There's just a single vowel that's changed in those.
Too similar.
I actually thought it was a typo at first.
Yeah, I think it's confusingly worded. Again, it's copy and paste from a site that I use. So.
Yeah. 2017 IPL cricket final.
It is that time of year, John.
Yeah, I know. Rajiv Gandhi. Is that Gandhi? Yeah, I think so. Stadium. Hyderabad, Mumbai Indians beat Rising Pune Supergiant by 1 run. Krunal Pandya, 47.
Okay.
How'd I do?
Sure. Fine.
I know when you don't jump in and correct me that I'm at least in the ballpark.
We might be in danger of violating the policy of speaking in tongues on the podcast and then not having an interpreter. So
Yeah, well, I don't know what to say to that. Let's keep going. 2023, just one short year ago, PGA Championship Men's Golf Oak Hill Country Club's Brooks Koepka claims his 3rd career PGA Championship and 5th major title by 2 shots over Victor Hovland and Scotty Scheffler.
there you go. So it comes full circle.
It does.
Who do you like out of that?
Oh, goodness. Maybe Ken Griffey?
Yeah, I like Junior. One thing you liked?
Okay, so the one thing I like is I started using a new email client to help me hit inbox 0 more quickly. They claim to be the fastest email in the business. It's called Superhuman.
Okay.
And their goal is to get you through email in less than 30 minutes a day through all your email.
And what does it do to facilitate that? What makes it different from just your standard Gmail?
Yeah. Intuitive keyboard shortcuts, command bar. There's a number of things.
Okay.
I can show it to you later if you'd like. There's a couple of lovely things that it does that's really helpful in my role where I can send an email and I can see when people read it.
There you go.
That's really handy for me. And I can see if they read it on a mobile device or their laptop.
I used to have something like that. I feel a little sheepish actually knowing that sometimes.
It's really – so like for instance, I emailed an individual last night asking for a meeting and I saw that he opened it last night at 8 o'clock. And so I was like, okay, if I don't hear from him in like 36 hours or by Monday, I'll probably send him another email.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He responded this morning.
There you go.
So and I sent another email yesterday and the individual has not opened it yet. So I'm like, well, I shouldn't expect a response until he opens it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Does that feel a little invasive as the recipient?
Maybe. I could see – I sent you an email yesterday and I could see when you opened it.
You sent me an email yesterday. Oh, is it your notes?
My notes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. Anyway, so it's called Superhuman?
Superhuman.
Okay. Well, gotcha. Okay. I'm going to go with my wife and I have been watching through Frasier. Did you ever watch Frasier? That's before your time.
I never watched Frasier.
Okay.
No.
You're familiar with the concept, though.
I know is it a spinoff from Cheers?
It is, yeah.
So I know that.
Yeah, so Kelsey Grammer is the lead character.
I know the bald guy, Frasier.
Yeah, that's
Right.
Kelsey Grammer.
Oh, is that Kelsey Grammer?
Yep.
I thought that was a woman. But outside of that, I don't. I know his dad is a prominent feature in the show as well.
Marty. Yeah. Retired cop.
Okay, and what does Frasier do?
He's a psychiatrist.
Okay.
And he has a brother, Niles, who's also a psychiatrist.
Okay.
And
do they make fun of modern psychology?
oh gosh, it mocks psychiatry a little bit, yes, but more so it mocks their utter pretentiousness. Like they are obviously pretentious snobs, and it mocks them in a humorous way. They also have a home health aide who lives in Frasier's apartment with him and his dad, who is British.
Oh.
And so she's a great character too. So anyway, but it's a blast. One of the great things about watching some of these shows is that in the era before, like now we're at a point where they do have cell phones, but like not smartphones.
Yeah.
And just in the era before phones, like you just forget like how basic things, like there are whole plots that collapse if someone's got a cell phone.
Oh, yeah.
You know, true with Seinfeld.
True with Seinfeld, yep.
I mean, just things where it's like, well, that would never happen today because everyone involved would have a cell phone. You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's funny. It's enjoyable. It's freely available on Amazon Prime if you have an Amazon Prime subscription.
Nice.
So, very much enjoy it. So that is my one thing I liked. All right, John, we have talked Scotty Scheffler.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we have talked Patrick Schreiner, The Transfiguration of Christ. For the next episode, which we will record here in a few minutes, read chapter 3. A little smaller chunk to digest.
You're not giving me a whole lot of time to read.
I think you're good. We talked about setting the stage for the English Reformation. We talked about Ken Griffey Jr. We talked about John's efforts to become superhuman.
That's right.
And my watching of Frasier. So I think by definition, we have covered our various and sundry topics. So all that's left to say is, until next time, the Lord bless you all real good.
Later.